just thrilled to introduce Dr. Brenda Kenny from Canada. You're going to hear that she has a little accent. She's going to say process instead of process. I've been doing quite a bit of work in Canada in the last couple years, and it's fascinating up there. I had to learn how to use, cubic meters and all kinds of metric stuff that people in the U.S. are too stupid to use. And I got to know Brenda when she was the head of the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, CEPA. I'm not going to read her bio. There's bios of all the speakers in your packets. But Brenda brings a rich background, both as the head of CEPA, an industry association. Before that, she was an executive in the National Energy Board of Canada. She's worked with all kinds of nonprofits looking at different emission issues and environmental issues. So she comes at it. She's kind of got all three legs of that stool wrapped into one person. So I really welcome Brenda Kenny to the stage while I find her. There it is. Dr. Brenda Kenny.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. And I was really honored to receive Carl's invitation to be involved today and tomorrow, and also to help kick things off. I think the first instance of why he phoned me was because I had been one of 5 members of an expert panel. I hate that word expert. Let's just say a panel from the Canadian equivalent of the Secretary of Energy. Our Minister of Natural Resources, Jim Carr, had asked 5 Canadians to look at across the country at how we would modernize the National Energy Board. And that work ran from December of last year till mid-May, and the report was issued in mid-June. So I'll speak a little bit to that experience because, and I'll say for me, it was really an honor to serve on that panel, as it was a bit of a culmination and a great exercise in listening. Many cities, hundreds of presentations and submissions, and we made sure in our conversations that every time we met in a city and listened to presentations, we also had a roundtable dialogue. So you'll hear me talk a little bit about that. But as I got ready to answer this question, getting to a clean, safe, secure energy future, I also, reflected in preparation for today on some many personal stories. I'm sure all of us in this room have experienced why you come to something like this, why you work where you do, the sort of things that get you up in the morning around pursuing things you really care about, things you care about for your kids. We've all had learning along the way, some of it data-driven, but most of it, I think, about human interactions. And one example of that, a story I'd like to share, is a situation I found myself in a few years ago, where in the midst of the most raucous parts of the pipeline debate in Canada, and maybe the most raucous parts aren't even here yet, but at a point in time when it was pretty contentious, a group of us got together in British Columbia for a day, very wide range of different perspectives, Indigenous community, environmentalist, industry, and talked about pipelines, talked about energy, environment, climate change. And the thing that came to mind for me, there was a great deal of learning all around the table, but at the end of the day, a young mother approached me who was a local citizen, and she said, I really learned a lot today. And I said, well, I'm glad, and so did I, and thank you for sharing your perspectives. It really meant a lot. And she said, I just wanted to tell you that when I arrived this morning, I was pretty sure that I wouldn't like you, and I was pretty sure I knew where you'd be standing on issues. And now that I got to know you, I know we don't always agree on things, but I feel like I can trust you, and I feel like I'd like to have more conversations. And to me, that small piece of feedback was indicative of what I've felt for a long time and what we'll talk about this morning, and it echoes what Carl was saying. We're at a point now where the only productive way forward is to enter these with open hearts and minds, and look for solutions that really matter, and don't come to it with assumptions. So I wanted to set a bit of context first, and because a central part of us getting to the finish line or advancing our goals, I would just say, let's assume our goals are tackle climate change and keep pipelines safe while we need them. Trust is very, very stormy right now, and I think it's largely getting in our way. The NEB Modernization Review heard a lot about that, so I have some thoughts about where to from here as well. The context is tricky. We've got a lot of disruption, a lot of uncertainty. On the one hand, energy forecasts are saying we can count on 150 million electric vehicles by 2040, which is fantastic. But at the same time, energy forecasts are saying we would expect more crude oil production globally, not less. And you think, well, how is that possible? And we have a goal of keeping our climate to less than 2 degrees rise, but at the same time, consumers are demanding inexpensive energy, and technology change is uncertain. We also have a lot of activism, a lot of anger, a lot of change, and I included here a photo from Canada where our Indigenous peoples are reaching, I think, a very special turning point with our country. Our government has declared its commitment to the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and part of our work in the NEB Modernization Review was to come to terms with what would modern regulation look like if you truly lived that UNDRIP, which includes free, prior, and informed consent. A new way forward, deeply recognizing that any of us in North America, any of us, are treaty people. This isn't someone else's thing. We are all treaty people. So this is fundamental. So, but trust. I don't know if any of you in the room have looked at the Edelman Trust Barometer. I put the website up there. I'd encourage you to look at this and look at it again when their new report comes out. But they're a large global public opinion company. They've looked at where trust is going. They've looked at evaluation of how people are feeling about things. And it's disturbed me greatly over the last number of years that trust has been slipping away. And the 2017 one used words like crisis, broadly declined. Edelman is very, very concerned. The key findings are basically that, the mass population just rejects authority. Trust has declined across all quarters, and there's particularly major trust in media and government. 53% of people believe the system is failing them. And that distrust is so deep. Unfortunately, it's moving from concerns to fear, which is very acute in the U.S., I would say. Unfortunately, the countries are ranked, and this is a serious issue. So people have, out of fear, become closed to new perspectives. And aside from whether or not you like anyone in the room, once we are not listening, once we have the bias filter up because of fear, once we have statistics like 53% of people do not listen to contrary views, period. Or if they do, they're 4 times more likely to ignore data that is contrary to their own opinion. These are dangerous things because it really breaks down the opportunity for us to have a conversation and actually get to the outcomes that we're looking for. Again, a bit like Carl's comments on whether you're an in-the-grounder or not, we can still agree that existing pipelines need to be safe, and while we migrate to other clean sources of energy, we need to be looking at that goal together. We don't have to believe in a future of fossil fuels to believe in pipeline safety and to get on with that in a respectful and effective manner. So it's within that context that this NEB Modernization Review was launched. We had hundreds of presentations, 1,200 individuals, 10 cities, about 20 days of what you might call hearings, but they were structured in a way that was very inviting to folks intentionally. We were asked to look at a range of themes, including how the National Energy Board is governed, what their mandate is, their roles, and as I said before, Indigenous engagement went right through to this United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And we became using the term, a Cree term, Ikanakaski, which really means keeping the land pure. And I, in addition to my other career paths, have spent some time in academia looking at sustainable development. And I found myself learning a lot through this process that really gave me a great deal of confidence that if we can, in a respectful, trustworthy way, engage more effectively and truly deeply engage with our many Indigenous communities, their worldview is going to be very helpful to us, and I hope that our technological Western solutions might integrate and be useful to them as well. So let's start and keep talking. The highlights of what we heard are no surprise. These pipeline projects are right in the crosshairs of climate change and energy debates. It's very unclear what the policy and vision is directionally. We heard a lot about the problem of regulatory hearings becoming very polarizing policy forums. We were doing this work in a period of time where a relatively new Canadian government had come in and was vehemently committed to climate change and to transitions in the economy. I know that you have lived that yourselves recently, perhaps in an opposite direction for the time being. But nonetheless, my own belief and what we heard from folks is that while we have a crisis of confidence, we need to look at the long view. Unfortunately, most governments are no longer positioned to look at the long view. They used to be when I was a kid, but long view is hard. Long view is hard on companies which are grappling with major financial issues and risks. Long view is not hard if you're a community member, and long view should not be hard if you're a regulator. So setting the table for ways to hold on to that long view and move through it is crucial. And as a result, there's deep concerns, but what we heard loud and clear across our country was that win-win solutions are absolutely possible, and there's a huge amount of common ground to build on. So trust and confidence is achievable, but it will take strong leadership, new processes, and much greater transparency. When we took what we'd heard and tried to move that into key principles, we relied on these, and welcome to look at our report. Each one of these had under it questions we asked ourselves as we drafted. What do we mean by living in a nation-to-nation relationship? What do we mean by alignment of policy goals? How would we know we're getting there? And at the end of the day, keywords here: living relationship, alignment, transparency, engagement, and results. There's no point in having process without focusing on, or process, whatever you prefer, without coming about to the reality that that regulatory efficiency and effectiveness actually does matter. It's the regulatory efficiency and effectiveness is not some lexicon for some linear perspective, but actually is clarity of what the heck are we here trying to accomplish. And so where we landed in terms of outcomes and structures was that there really did need to be a clear and coherent national strategy to realize these things that come together. This cannot be handled with energy over here, environment there, social there, Indigenous there. We need to have a coherent national strategy. If that's difficult at the level of government, I think at least we can come together as citizens and regulators, and hopefully companies as well, and paint that long view, and hopefully it gives us beacons even in the disruption and uncertainty. An independent energy agency, which you have in the US, we do not have in Canada, and the National Energy Board has typically held that role, but increasingly transparency matters, robust independent information and reporting matters, and the NEB's done, I think, a very good job of that over time. But critical data analytics, online, rapid information analysis are just, it has to be furthered, and we need a modern commission that is governed toward those outcomes alongside hearing commissioners. On decision making, our biggest recommendation was there should be one phase that looks at whether or not there's alignment with national interest, and a second phase where, if yes, then proceed with a detailed review. What we heard from citizens and from industry was there were processes that would be years long from a company point of view, literally billions and billions of dollars spent to eventually get to a no that was really a policy no, not a fact no. So if you have a policy no, let's say your climate change objectives have moved and you believe that with respect to the in the ground or outcome, you don't want any more fossil fuel production. That's a policy thing. You don't need to look at 2,000 stream crossings to know you have an issue. But equally, a fair, open, transparent evaluation of what do you mean by macro GHG emissions, and if, for example, we're producing natural gas to get China and India off coal, and on a global level that's a win, that's a policy realization that might run counter to one's assumptions, which leads to yes. So you can do those up front in about a year, look at the macro issues, including indigenous interests, outline the concerns and things that have to be looked at in later conditions and regulation, and move that through. And I want to really highlight here, moving it through, assuming you're moving to yes and further conditions, really hallmarks the importance and the critical nature of a connectivity from the first conversations through to the eventual abandonment of that pipeline. Because all those conversations, all those assumptions, all those things we care about must flow through to what the regulator is on for both construction and operations. And equally, during operations, ongoing roundtable conversation and deeper engagement to verify that the things that were promised are being delivered on, and that the adaptation and improvement is occurring. Those interests must be brought up into the front of the process. And right now we have so many breakpoints. We're losing, I would say, wisdom. We're losing the intellect and the heart of knowing what we care about. And we're driving ourselves into situations that are intentionally controversial, are set up to be adversarial, as are many litigious processes, and are undermining our ability to both have substantive participation, increased scope of engagement, and ultimately better relationships. So in summary on that point, our report focused on really innovative approaches to nation structures. We felt it was important to have a separate office that could help. Keep in mind there's not one First Nation. We've got over 600 in Canada. There's many here as well. And individual communities each have a right to have their traditional use and interests understood. They may need support not from a proponent and not from a regulator, but an ongoing crucible of best practice that they can tap into if they wish. Canada has very unique structure to our treaties, and also some unsettled territory, quite a bit of unsettled territory, and so that may be unique to what you would see in the U.S. But that feeds into a robust whole of government alignment and approach, and effective one process, one review. If we break up these processes and have EA over here and Indigenous consultation there and technical decisions there, we're nowhere near sustainable development. We have to look at these things together and do so in an adaptive engagement approach that embraces a life cycle continuous improvement approach. We do include in this the vision of a regulatory continuous improvement cycle, which is outlined in our report. And I in no way want anyone to take away anything I'm saying to suggest we should undermine standards. Standards are the foothold. Minimum standards are always there. But we need to be proactive in monitoring and engage together around what needs to be improved upon. React and take action, either where there's an improvement necessary, or, God forbid, where there's an emergency response is necessary, and from that we better learn and we better improve. So it requires also in that cycle analysis, learning, some reports on how's it going, some focus on strategy. There may be 1,000 things we'd like to improve upon, but in any given year, what are the 3 that are really going to knock it out of the park on getting better? And I think we're going to hear about some of those during the course of this. So I have about 5 minutes remaining, and I want to just focus on where to from here, and we'll invite your questions afterwards. Returning, ironically, to the Eidelman report, I was intrigued to see that their vision of institutions gaining trust is actually very, very similar to where our NEB modernization report landed. In the past, institutions and government worked for the people. Very good people. I worked there myself 30 years ago. Worked our best. I shut down pipelines when they weren't safe. I did all the engineering study stuff that would lead to better standards. Great, but never, ever, ever talk to a landowner, because gosh, I was the engineer. Like, why would I talk to a landowner? That has created a tension, right? I mean, influence and authority. How do I know that that engineer has my best intentions in mind? How I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. After all, it's my community, it's my backyard, it's my traditional territory. So a new model that is much more with the people is crucial. And I also want to point to setting the rules. We take great comfort sometimes in saying, okay, something's wrong, there ought to be a rule. You ought to set that down. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that. The problem is, when you have a rule, it's solving yesterday's problem, which is great, should be solved, but it's hard to set aspirations and move toward continuous improvement. There's always a tension between driving to compliance and actually meeting evolving expectations. And I dare say that driving to compliance, as critical as it is, and as I said, I've been a regulator, crucial, but compliance never drives you to excellence. Compliance drives you to the latest rule. We need both. And instead of just having a static rule, we have to also enable adaptive processes. This will become even more crucial as we harness clean energy and as we harness technologies like I think we'll hear about in the room around smart pigs, deep data analytics, and understanding of how to parse where the next concern should be coming from. We need room to adapt and not be hamstrung with well-intentioned but outdated rules. And I want to say that I think there's actually a lot of good things happening. And while there are company laggards who should get hauled across the carpet, shut down if they need to be, and there are activists who are intentionally misleading, creating fear where there needn't be fear. And there are some regulators who maybe on occasion have been asleep at the switch, but not often in my experience. In any event, when you look at the responsibilities as they've developed in regulators and in industry responses, when we look at the glasses half full, not half empty, what's really remarkable and exciting to me is that in fact we are rowing in the same direction. There is a lot to build on, a strong foundation that is actually very similar across the two, whether you're looking at management systems and potentially some industry things like responsible care and chemicals or SEPA integrity first, alongside what's going on in government, which is, better planning tools, better measures and reporting. So we should be able to build on this. Now, in closing, a couple of personal thoughts. First of all, assumptions are misleading. You can't just look at data alone, and we're dealing with a very fluid, chaotic environment. Good decisions absolutely require external perspectives. And relationships that can challenge assumptions will ultimately give us better results. We need to be open to challenge. We need to accept tough questions. And rational is not a single truth. Our global realities don't always align. Like I said, we've got, energy issues and climate issues. I've yet to see a single energy report anywhere on the planet, including California, that is honest and actually delivers our goal collectively of not going over 2 degrees Celsius on a global level in terms of climate change. They are both crucial. And at the same time, anyone will realize local realities don't align either. Every one of us is both a consumer and a citizen. Most consumers will say, I want low energy prices. A few will say, I get the link, I need to have a price on carbon to get to a transition, so I'll accept higher energy prices. Very few will say that. Very few will vote that way. We're also all citizens. We want to have energy that's clean. We want to have climate change addressed. We want to have these things done, which is crucial and not necessarily aligned. We also have issues around looking for win-win accommodation or polarizing veto. So the third point is we all need to be prepared to lead. This isn't just about, them. It isn't just about those darn regulators or those damn companies. This is about every one of us in the room. And I invite us to consider the difference between courage and despair. We own this. Each of us owns this. Do you enter a conversation being cynical, or do you enter it being skeptical, probing, asking hard questions? I'm from Missouri on that one is different than you're a bastard, I'm not going to listen to you. Interests or fixed positions, being intentional about I expect results versus complacent, I give up, I'm in despair. So, change is needed. Yes, I do believe it's possible. Government is accountable for the roles, the basic rules, helping us create the architecture. Companies are responsible for their own operations, and they better well get it right, and there should be rules in place to make sure that they do. But each and every one of us has expertise, knowledge, experience to bring to the table, and each and every one of us is accountable for how we enter the conversation in the room today and every day forward. And part of our striving to be and expect both trustworthiness and successful outcomes. And with that, I want to thank Carl and the team for an amazing lineup in the coming days and for the absolutely superb work that Pipeline Safety Trust has done. And I think very much reflects everything I've just talked about in terms of how to move forward. So thank you, Carl. Thank you.
Questions? Sure. We have time for a couple of questions, and I hadn't set up the question thing, so anybody have some questions for Dr. Kenny? There's one up here. It looks like Czech Lesniak. If you shout it out to me, I will repeat it. Oh, there's someone found the microphones.
Thank you. Really interesting talk and perspective. One of the things in talking about the proposed process for looking at new infrastructure, where you look first is it consistent with where you want to go in terms of national alignment and policy, and then do the detailed review afterwards. How, in that kind of model, how will you balance the potential conflict of we've already made a decision that this is in our national best interest, this is where we want to go,
yeah.
But then if you find things during the detailed review, the technical review, that says maybe this is not a good idea, how do you address that conflict?
Oh, great question. If you're interested in that in a little more detail, the report outlines a bit more of the thinking on that, but I'll use a specific example. Let's say emergency response, because part of that first phase is is there anything about the proposed project that is going to be surprising or different than what we've faced before? And on emergency response, for example, you know the product that would be flowing, you know the terrain, you know the best-in-class emergency response requirements, etc. So our belief as a panel was you don't need to ask the proponent or the public, for that matter, to grind through 2,000 stream crossings, and that's typical in Canadian territory, to ask the fundamental question, is emergency response adequate, and what are the special features that would be required for this type of undertaking? Later, when you get down to those 2,000 stream crossings, of course there will be individuals who say, well, I gave you my views before, but now it's in my backyard, and no way, not on my life, are you having this go through. That's why the policy dialogue is so crucial, because you've had a good solid conversation about the types of measures that are essential given the product, and then you're talking about the conditions upon which you would cross that area. So you're not running into a situation where you have a very late stage surprise, unless it's something completely out of the blue that had not been considered at the front end.
One more up here.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Is the National Energy Board reorganization going to consider marine issues? And
Great question.
and also cooperation in response between U.S. and Canadian first responders?
Yeah, perfect question. So when we talked about need for a whole of government approach, we also contemplated a need for better connection points. We did not recommend that the NEB oversee the Coast Guard or the Port of Metro Vancouver or what have you, but we think it's crucial that those linkages be hardwired, and particularly if you're looking, say, again, going back to that policy level, you want to ask up front, is there anything, if this is, for example, an export pipeline to not increase global emissions and oil, but offset from less clean sources potentially. So we could have a discussion about whether or not we can get to a better outcome and export, but that's for another day. I'll say, I'm not affiliated with anybody, so I'll give you my straight up example of what I feel. For example, Canada now has announced an oceans protection plan. We are, like the U.S., a large energy, a large, robust, advanced nation with 3 oceans to steward. And our Arctic is probably, second only to Russia in scale, plus 2 huge coasts, much of which is probably, I would say, much more pristine even than the U.S. coast, albeit crucially important to all of us. I was talking to someone earlier about surfing, so we know how important coastlines are for everybody. The Ocean Protections Plan and the science that Canada has undertaken on looking at the fate and behavior of all types of crude oil moving in our systems, and then a clear-eyed look at what does that imply about emergency response, time, technology, equipment, funding, must be in place. That should be in place whether you're running, barges delivering fuel oil to a remote community on the coast, or whether you're contemplating some other kind of export. Whether you're just continuing regular cargo in and out of major ports. Those are all the same questions. And for the Canadian coast, all of the U.S. Alaska crude going down our coast daily. My point is, those are basic fundamental no-brainers of good policy and good science that if it was in place and there was a new project, it's much easier to say, okay, now, does this project change the science? Does it change the things that good-hearted stakeholders and others have been working on for the last decade? What's new? What would have to be different? Do we need more tugs? Do we say no? Is it a step too far? What about the cumulative effects? That's a front-end question. To have that come up in year 5, after everyone's been through the ringer and a company has spent $1 billion, it's just not right. It's not productive, it's not fair, and it doesn't move us forward.
All right, we are about out of time. I don't know if this is on. I need to ask the last question. Often we see these panels formed, and you do a review and a report, and then it sets on a shelf somewhere. So what's been the response from the Government of Canada?
Well, thanks, Carl. So the Government of Canada, gave a bit of a response, but most importantly, they launched our review roughly in parallel with a review of how we do environmental assessment in Canada, and how we look at fisheries issues and navigable waters. which is, a crucial part of the fabric of our country. So this government has made a commitment to modernize across a suite of regulatory mechanisms, and I applaud them for that. As I said before, there's no point in drilling down in details in one part or another. Does the whole system get you to sustainable development and UNDRIP and fairness to communities and economy? So I was just in Ottawa last week. I have no insight into what has become a memorandum to cabinet, but I can tell you that a team across government agencies has been working very, very hard over a number of months to try to come together on what would be a whole of government response to modernization, including the NEB, one part of that. And I understand, and I don't think this is any big surprise that that's moving forward pretty aggressively. This government the Trudeau government said they're committed to that modernization, and I believe they will. So I have no inside knowledge. It's very, very confidential at this stage, but I wouldn't be surprised to see something out before Christmas.
Great. Thank you. Help me thank Dr. Kenny.
Thank
you. As Carl's setting up the next set of slides, all of you who are tucked away in the back, there's room for 10